This is one of the reasons why the narrative about police bothers me so much. I have a brother who's a police officer. He's now just retired, but he became a lieutenant. So he rose all the way up through the ranks in inner city Albany, where I'm from. And he was attacked at one point by a gang of thugs who came after him and really hurt him. He was in the hospital for a long time. And what did he do when he got better? He went right back out. This is when he was a beat, on foot patrolman, went right back out and kept protecting them and went into house after house. This is a predominantly Black neighborhood, house after house, protecting women who are getting beaten and kids who are getting hurt and, Black members of the community who are victims of Black on Black crime, which is what it tended to be there, and never once said a racist thing. This is my brother. I know him well. He never once said a racist thing, had a racist thought, just kept going back out there to protect folks, was never accused of anything like that, had a stellar career. And then because of some cop in Minneapolis, he's got the nation pointing at him saying, you're a racist. You're a terrible person. You're a racist. And you and your fellow cops don't deserve funding for what you do. He's just one example of cops who are like, what? What? Yeah. Like, this is the thanks that we get? And he continued doing his job, as did his brethren out there serving the community. But so many have said, forget this. Forget it. Yeah. Why would I do this?
Yeah, well, that's the thing I don't think people quite fully appreciate. And it's a real incongruity in the left's critique, right? The idea that policing is an institution built on and built for the oppression of low-income minority communities is just incongruous with the reality of policing, which is that police officers are being disproportionately deployed to areas with the largest crime problems, which tend to have disproportionately Black and Latino populations. As a result, when they do their job, the public safety benefits associated with that job inure primarily to those very communities. And I like to ask people the rhetorical question, why on earth would an institution allegedly designed and operated for the specific oppression of this particular community so disproportionately benefit that community when the institution achieves its stated ends as stated by the people at the institution's helm? Ask any police chief in the country, what is it that you want to do? How do you define success? And they say, I want to keep crime under control. I want to get crime down. That's how I define my success. Well, who benefits if crime goes down, right? In the United States of America, the homicide victimization rate for Black men is 10x that of white men, right? In my home city of New York, 95% of all shooting victims every single year, at least, that's a minimum, are either Black or Hispanic. Almost all of them are male, right? So when you look at things like the crime decline, which over the course of the 1990s, what you find is that it disproportionately, in fact, almost exclusively benefited low-income minority communities. It added, between 1990 and 2014, the decline in homicides added a full year of life expectancy to the average Black man's life. It only added 0.14 years of life expectancy to the average white man's life. Now, the public health equivalent of that, according to a study done by a very liberal criminologist named Patrick Sharkey, is the elimination of obesity altogether. Now, why on earth would these institutions be okay with providing those kinds of benefits to those communities if it were true that they harbored nothing but racial animus for those communities? It's just, it's a glaring incongruity that no one seems keen to explain. But it tells us why policing is such a noble profession. These are people who are going into communities that are incredibly disadvantaged and literally risking their lives on a daily basis to make life more livable. And that is something that should be applauded. And instead, it's denigrated.
Yeah. In college, I had a boyfriend whose dad was a New York City cop. He worked in White Plains. And he was talking to, once you know one cop, you know a lot of cops because they hang out together. Right. And his brothers down in the Bronx, in blue, they're drawing their guns every day. Every day. This is in the 90s in New York and the Bronx. Some cops never have to draw their gun, never once. Mm-hmm. These guys are in such a dangerous area back then. It was, can you imagine in a profession where you have to draw your gun every day, which means you're in great danger too. And all we do in today's day and age is crap all over them and tell them they're awful. To me, it's a congruence of the media, which in particular in an election year, like we saw with George Floyd, takes a tape like that and puts it on loop and works to elect Democrats with it. And an underlying problem with the cops, which is short of of unjustified shootings, they have been too rough, in particular with Black suspects. And that pops up in the research too. Even people like Roland Fryer, who are, he did the seminal study showing that there is not a disproportionate rate of cops killing unarmed Black men. Short of killing is brutality. And so the experience of many Black men in America of having been roughed up by cops or pulled over too many times by cops, Tim Scott was talking about, I think it was like 17 times or some ridiculous number he's been pulled over just in the past 20 years. Me, one time. One, right? Yeah. So that experience, that sort of, forgive the term because I hate it, but lived experience of Black men feeling extra suspect when dealing with cops, layered into an agenda-driven media and Democrats, agenda-driven party that represents half the United States, merging to produce this false narrative of cops, as LeBron James said, like on the hunt to kill Black men.
Right. And, and even with respect to the disproportionality that we see in non-deadly uses of force, such as what was found in Roland's study, which, it's important to remember that use of force generally is still a very rare occurrence, right? So we're seeing disproportionality in what is still a very statistically rare outcome of a police-citizen interaction, right? If you look at studies of arrests or police contacts, police use force at about 1% of all arrests that they effect. So it is incredibly reflective of their restraint as a broader profession. And that often gets lost in the media's sort of hyper focus on any evidence that sort of backs up this narrative that we know has huge political implications, which is that, the police are part of this sort of broader racist system, that produces inequities that need to be addressed. I mean, there was a study done, and I talk about it in the book, that looked at 1 million calls for service across 3 police departments in 3 different states, in Arizona, Louisiana, and North Carolina, over a 2-year period. That led to 114,000 criminal arrests. And that entire data set, 1 million calls for service, 114,000 arrests, there's just one fatal police shooting captured. It was of an armed suspect. And police used force in less than 1% of all of the arrests that they effected. And in 98% of the cases in which they did use force, there was either no injury or mild injury to the suspect. And so that context gets lost in our national conversation. And what that leads to is the sorts of really radical policy interventions that we saw rush through the legislative process since 2020. I mean, more than 30 states passed in excess of 140 police reform bills just in the year after George Floyd's death in this country.
Can you say that again? More than 30? Say that
more
again.
Than 30 states passed over 140 police reform bills in the year after George Floyd's death. That is an enormous amount of policy movement in a very short period of time, probably policies enacted with very little thought given to the potential downside risks associated with that. And now I think we're starting to have to grapple with the reality that maybe it wasn't such a good idea to systematically lower the transaction costs of committing a crime and to systematically raise the transaction costs of enforcing the law. I did an event at UC Berkeley yesterday to talk about my book, and someone asked the question of, why is it that despite crime going up in so many American cities, we haven't seen the kind of backlash that you might expect? And I think the answer to that is a function of where crime concentrates. The vast majority of Americans live in places that are as safe as the safest places in the world. There are just so many degrees of removal between the typical American and the sort of violence that is currently plaguing the north side of Philadelphia or the west side of Chicago. And so those degrees of removal create a sense of sort of foreignness to that kind of problem. And the lack of understanding, the lack of experience with actual high levels of criminal violence, I think sort of artificially increases a tolerance for a policy agenda that probably shouldn't be tolerated to the degree that it is.
Have you ever had a friend who's naturally talented at things? They just pick up a sport or a hobby or a thing, and they immediately become good at it. They make it look easy. Well, if you don't have that friend, it's you, and we're all secretly jealous of you. The good news is, no matter who you are, you can make great food look easy with Good Ranchers. They source the highest quality meat in America, and they can prove it. Each piece of meat is from real American farms and hand-cut and trimmed by real American workers. They only source from farms that meet their high standards of excellence, which means no antibiotics ever and no added hormones. Good Ranchers is so confident in the quality they sell that they have a 100% satisfaction guarantee on every box they ship to you. Plus, you can use my code Megyn to get 3 free shipping and $30 off on your first order. This is America's best meat and seafood sold by some of America's best people. They've won awards like Best Food Subscription, but their mission is still the same, bringing everyone to the table to share in the best of what makes life good. If you want the best, go with Good Ranchers. Visit goodranchers.com/Megyn, Megyn, to save on American meat delivered right to your door. Hey, thanks so much for watching. If you like what you just saw, hit the subscribe button for more clips and full episodes.